My daughter's husband thought it was a great idea to rob me. After all, what could one old man do to stop him? He'd been planning it for weeks, watching my routines, waiting for the perfect opportunity to get his hands on what he thought was easy money. His first attempt had failed when he couldn't crack my safe combination, but Jake Morrison was nothing if not persistent. That night, when he finally broke into my safe, what he found inside wasn't treasure. It was the beginning of his worst nightmare. Before I reveal what happened next, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments. What would you have done in Lewis's shoes? The tiny red LED blinked in the darkness of my study. Jake Morrison couldn't see it from where he crouched beside my safe, his phone's flashlight casting dancing shadows across the mahogany walls, but I could see everything from my bedroom, watching his every move through the live feed on my tablet. This was his second attempt at breaking into my safe. His first reconnaissance mission 3 days ago had ended in failure when he couldn't crack the combination. My jaw clenched as he reached for the corporate documents, the same hands that had shaken mine 18 months ago when I'd hired him out of desperation and kindness. Jake stood up from the safe, clutching the fake papers I'd planted there. His face showed pure triumph in the phone's glow. He thought he'd outsmarted me, thought he'd found the keys to my kingdom while I slept peacefully in my bed. The corporate documents scattered across his hands would theoretically give him control of Patterson Industries, if they weren't complete forgeries designed to destroy him the moment he tried to use them. My tablet showed him carefully photographing each page, his movements efficient and practiced. This wasn't desperation, this was calculation. Cold, methodical theft from the man who'd given him everything. The man whose daughter he'd sworn to love and protect. Jake Morrison, my son-in-law, was stealing my life's work while believing himself to be the smartest person in the room. Jake had just given me exactly what I needed to destroy him completely, and he'd done it while believing he was the predator. Some hunters don't realize they've walked into a trap until the jaws snap shut around them. Jake slipped out of my study like a ghost, leaving behind only the lingering scent of his cologne and the complete evidence of his betrayal. The red light continued blinking, recording everything, storing it in the cloud where he could never reach it. He thought he'd won the game tonight, but he didn't understand that I'd been playing chess while he was playing checkers. Sleep wouldn't come easily. In 7 days, Jake would walk into the boardroom at Patterson Industries, confident in his stolen authority, ready to claim what he believed was rightfully his. He would face Emma, my board of directors, and me with his head held high, believing he held all the cards. The discovery began with a missing $100 bill from petty cash. Such a small thing, really, the kind of mistake anyone could make in a busy office. I'd brushed it off, told myself that Jake was still learning the system, still adjusting to the responsibility I'd placed on his shoulders. After all, I'd hired him 18 months ago when he was desperate, when Emma had begged me to give her boyfriend a chance at proving himself professionally. Looking back now, Jake had played his role perfectly from the very beginning. The unemployed young man who'd been out of work for 8 months, growing increasingly bitter about his inability to find opportunities that matched his perceived potential. He'd convinced Emma that employers were overlooking his talents, that he just needed someone to believe in him and give him the chance to prove what he was capable of achieving. Emma, with her generous heart and faith in second chances, had fallen for his narrative completely. He had arrived at our first family barbecue with flowers for Emma and a bottle of wine for me, his smile genuine enough to fool a man who'd built his fortune reading people and understanding their motivations. He'd spoken eloquently about his desire to contribute meaningfully to a family business, to build something lasting, rather than just collecting a paycheck from some corporate employer who would never appreciate his unique skills and perspective. I remembered thinking Emma had found herself a good match, someone who understood that real success came from dedication and family loyalty, rather than jumping between jobs in pursuit of slightly higher salaries. Jake had asked thoughtful questions about my business without seeming overly interested in the financial details, complimented Emma's intelligence and independence in ways that suggested he valued her for who she was rather than what she represented. The performance had been so convincing that I'd actually felt proud of my daughter's judgment in choosing someone worthy of the love she had to offer. When Emma had asked me to consider giving Jake a position at Patterson Industries, I'd agreed without hesitation, believing I was helping a deserving young man while strengthening my daughter's relationship with someone who would appreciate the opportunity I was providing. The pattern revealed itself slowly, like water finding cracks in a foundation that had seemed solid for decades. First the petty cash, then larger discrepancies in our client entertainment budget that couldn't be explained by simple accounting errors or misplaced receipts. Jake always had explanations. Receipts that didn't quite match the expenses, clients who'd supposedly requested cash payments for reasons that made sense when he explained them but seemed questionable in retrospect. His apologetic demeanor and quick corrections had disarmed my suspicions for months, turning what should have been red flags into yellow cautions that I'd filed away and gradually forgotten. He would appear genuinely distressed when discrepancies were discovered, volunteering to work extra hours to reconcile the accounts, expressing gratitude for my patience while he learned the intricacies of corporate financial management. But numbers don't lie, and I'd spent 3 decades making sure every dollar in Patterson Industries had its proper place. The accounting software told a different story than Jake's verbal explanations, revealing digital trails that accumulated over time like sediment in a riverbed. Every transaction left footprints. Every altered record created inconsistencies that became impossible to ignore once I started looking for patterns rather than accepting individual explanations. The software showed systematic withdrawals that corresponded with Jake's work schedule, altered expense reports that coincided with periods when he seemed particularly stressed or distracted, invoices that disappeared from our system only to reappear with different amounts. He had been stealing from me for over 6 months, and he'd been getting bolder with each successful theft, his confidence growing alongside his desperation. What disturbed me most wasn't the money itself. $23,000 was significant, but not devastating to a company of our size. What kept me awake at night was the realization that Jake had been sitting across from me at family dinners, accepting my advice about his career development, expressing heartfelt gratitude for the opportunities I'd provided, all while systematically looting the business that represented my life's work and my family's financial security. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. How does someone maintain intimate family relationships while secretly destroying the people who trust them most? Jake could genuinely seem to love Emma while stealing from her father. He could express sincere appreciation for my mentorship while forging documents that bore my signature. He could plan a future with my daughter while plotting to undermine the financial foundation that would support that future. I'd hired the private investigator on a Tuesday morning in early October, exactly 3 weeks before Jake's theft from my home safe, my hands shaking as I signed the retainer agreement in the cramped office of Sarah Mitchell Investigations. Part of me hoped I was wrong about him, hoped that his behavior had some innocent explanation that would restore my faith in human nature and preserve Emma's happiness with a man who might simply be struggling with problems he was too proud to discuss openly. Sarah Mitchell, a former police detective with 30 years of experience delivering bad news about loved ones, had looked at me with the weary compassion of someone who'd guided too many families through similar discoveries. "Mr. Patterson," she'd said while reviewing my preliminary evidence, "in 3 decades of doing this work, I've learned that when someone's instincts tell them something is fundamentally wrong, they're usually right about the core problem, even if they're wrong about the specific details." The report that arrived exactly 14 days later crushed whatever hopes I'd harbored for Jake's innocence while simultaneously validating every suspicion I'd tried to dismiss as paternal overprotectiveness. He had been researching my business and my family's financial situation for months before he'd even asked Emma out on their first date, studying us with the thoroughness of someone planning a military campaign rather than someone falling in love naturally. The phone records were what finally broke my heart while simultaneously opening my eyes to the true scope of Jake's deception and the danger he represented to Emma's safety. 47 calls to gambling hotlines in 3 months, each one representing another step deeper into an addiction that was consuming not just his own future, but potentially Emma's well-being. 12 conversations with something called quick cash solutions, a loan shark operation that my attorney had researched and found to be controlled by organized crime figures with a history of violence against debtors and their families. Jake wasn't just stealing my money to pay gambling debts, he was drowning in a spiral of financial obligations that threatened to pull Emma down with him, and the people he owed money to were the kind who viewed family members as acceptable collateral for unpaid debts. The woman I'd raised to believe in trust and honesty was married to a man who'd been lying to her from their very first date, putting her safety at risk with every bet he placed and every debt he accumulated. The micro camera cost me $800, but it was worth every penny for the peace of mind it provided. Smaller than a button, it nestled perfectly between two leather-bound copies of Harvard Business Review on my office shelf. Its lens no bigger than a pinhead, but capable of capturing full high-definition video with audio quality that would satisfy any court's evidence requirements. The technology amazed me. Streaming directly to my phone with battery life that lasted 48 hours and automatic cloud backup that would preserve every second of footage even if the device itself was discovered and destroyed. Jake would never spot it, not unless he knew exactly where to look and had the technical expertise to recognize surveillance equipment when he saw it. His background was in basic accounting and customer service, not corporate security or counter-surveillance. The camera was positioned at the perfect angle to capture both my safe and the area where someone would stand while opening it, with infrared capability that would provide clear images even in complete darkness. Installing the fake corporate documents took more finesse than I'd anticipated. I'd worked with my attorney, Margaret Chen, for 3 intensive sessions to create papers that looked authentic but contained fatal legal flaws that any competent lawyer would spot immediately. Transfer agreements with invalid witness signatures that didn't match the notary seals. Corporate resolutions that violated our company's bylaws in ways that would void any attempted transactions. Stock certificates that had never been properly registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission, making them worthless as collateral or proof of ownership. To Jake's untrained eye, they would appear to give him controlling interest in Patterson Industries, the power to make executive decisions, and the authority to access company funds without board oversight. To any competent lawyer, like Emma, they would be obviously fraudulent the moment she examined them with professional scrutiny. The genius of the trap lay in its simplicity. Jake's greed would blind him to the legal impossibilities, while Emma's training would reveal them immediately when he tried to use the documents to assert authority he'd never legitimately possessed. Margaret had questioned my methods during our planning sessions, her ethical training warring with her understanding of the situation. "Lewis, this seems elaborate. Why not simply fire him and press charges for the embezzlement we can already prove?" Her concerns were valid from a purely legal standpoint, but she didn't understand the deeper game at play. "Because embezzlement is just a crime, Margaret," I'd explained. "What Jake has done to Emma goes beyond stealing money. He's stolen her ability to trust, her faith in love itself, her confidence in her own judgment. A simple termination and criminal prosecution won't heal those wounds. She needs to see who she married, needs to understand the depth of his deception, or she'll spend the rest of her life wondering what she did wrong, questioning every relationship that comes after." The surveillance system went beyond the hidden camera in my study. Motion sensors throughout my house triggered alerts to my phone whenever someone entered after business hours, complete with timestamps and location data that would provide a complete timeline of Jake's unauthorized visits. Audio recorders strategically placed in areas where he might make phone calls captured every word he spoke during his nighttime visits, including conversations with his loan shark contacts and gambling associates. GPS tracking on the company vehicles revealed exactly where he went during his mysterious client meetings, mostly to casinos, loan shark offices, and cash advance businesses that operated out of strip malls in the seedier parts of town. The most crucial element was timing, and timing required understanding Jake's psychological state with mathematical precision. His gambling debts were reaching a crescendo according to the intercepted text messages and recorded phone conversations. His loan shark contact, Tommy Torelli, was growing impatient with delayed payments, escalating from gentle reminders to explicit threats that included Emma's safety as collateral for Jake's mounting obligations. The pressure would drive him to take bigger risks, to move from petty theft to grand larceny, to attempt something so audacious that it would expose him completely while providing me with unshakable legal evidence of his criminal intent. Creating that opportunity required careful theater worthy of a Broadway production. I announced a business trip to Chicago, complete with hotel reservations at the Palmer House and flight confirmations on American Airlines that Jake could verify if he chose to investigate. The trip was real enough to pass casual scrutiny, but fake enough to provide me with the alibi I needed to monitor his activities without being physically present in my house when he committed his crimes. In reality, I would be staying at Margaret's cabin 40 minutes outside town, monitoring Jake's activities through my phone while remaining close enough to return quickly if the situation required my physical presence. The cabin had excellent internet connectivity and multiple backup power sources, ensuring that my surveillance network would remain operational regardless of weather or technical difficulties. The night before my supposed departure, I made sure to mention the corporate documents during dinner with calculated casualness. "I've got all the important papers secured in my home office," I told Emma and Jake, making deliberate eye contact with my son-in-law while appearing to address both of them equally. Transfer agreements, stock certificates, the whole foundation of the business. Sometimes I worry about keeping everything in one place, but it's the most secure location I have until I can arrange for a safety deposit box at the bank. Jake's reaction was subtle but telling to someone who'd spent decades reading micro-expressions and body language in business negotiations. A slight tightening around his eyes that suggested increased attention and mental calculation. A barely perceptible lean forward when I mentioned the specific types of documents, indicating genuine interest despite his attempt to appear casual. His questions about my travel schedule seemed offhand enough. When was my flight? How long would I be gone? Did I need a ride to the airport? But I caught him studying my face when he thought I wasn't looking, searching for any sign that I suspected his true intentions. The fake departure required its own performance, complete with costume changes and careful timing that would have impressed any theater director. I made a show of packing my suitcase in the living room where Jake could observe, checking my flight times aloud while looking at my phone, even calling an Uber to take me to the airport while he was present to overhear the conversation. Every detail had to be perfect because he was intelligent enough to verify my story if something seemed suspicious. Jake offered to drive me to the airport, of course, playing the role of the devoted son-in-law with the same skill he'd shown throughout our relationship. His concern seemed genuine, his offer helpful rather than calculated. I declined graciously, mentioning that the Uber was already on its way and I didn't want to inconvenience him. The performance required me to act like the trusting father-in-law who had no idea his daughter's husband was planning to rob him blind. From Margaret's cabin 40 minutes outside town, I monitored my phone alerts as motion sensors throughout the house tracked Jake's movements. First the front door at 10:47 p.m., then the hallway leading to my study at 10:52 p.m. He was taking his time, probably listening for any sounds that might indicate I'd returned unexpectedly or that neighbors might be watching. The systematic approach revealed someone who'd thought through every contingency, every potential failure point in his plan. When I switched to the live camera feed at 11:15 p.m., the quality of the footage was remarkable, clear enough to capture his methodical search of my office. Jake moved like a professional burglar, systematically examining every drawer, every filing cabinet, every bookshelf for anything that might contain valuable documents or information about company finances. He rifled through my desk with practiced efficiency, photographing anything that looked remotely official or important. But the safe presented a different challenge. I watched him crouch before it, studying the combination lock with the intensity of someone who knew this was his real target but hadn't yet figured out how to access it. He tried a few obvious combinations: Emma's birthday, their wedding date, what he probably thought was my birthday. But the lock remained stubbornly closed. After 20 minutes of failed attempts, Jake stood up with visible frustration, his hands clenched into fists. He wasn't giving up, though. I could see the determination in his posture as he began a more systematic search of my office, looking for any clues I might have carelessly left about the combination. He examined every family photo, every business award, every document on my desk, searching for numbers that might unlock his path to what he believed was easy money. After 2 hours of fruitless searching, Jake finally left my house empty-handed, but I could tell from his body language that this was just reconnaissance. He would be back, and next time he would come prepared. My instincts proved correct when he returned with renewed determination 3 days later, having clearly done additional research on safe combinations. This time, he successfully cracked the code and stole what he believed were the keys to my empire, the very scene that would become the opening of his downfall. Margaret sat beside me in the cabin's living room, watching the feed over my shoulder with the fascination of someone witnessing a traffic accident in slow motion. "He's very thorough," she observed, as Jake carefully returned each document to its original position after photographing it. "Professional, almost. This isn't the work of a desperate amateur who stumbled into crime accidentally." Her comment struck me because it confirmed what I'd begun to suspect during weeks of surveillance. Jake wasn't just a gambling addict who'd stumbled into theft out of desperation and circumstance. His methods showed planning, research, and a level of criminal sophistication that suggested this might not be his first time targeting someone with significant assets. The private investigator had found evidence of him researching other wealthy families before focusing on Emma, though we hadn't been able to prove any previous criminal activity. Still, the patterns were troubling enough to warrant deeper investigation. "Margaret," I said, watching Jake lock the safe and carefully arrange my desk to hide any evidence of his presence, "I want you to run a deeper background check on him. Go back further than we did before. Check for any connection to other financial crimes, other wealthy families, anything that might suggest this is part of a larger pattern of predatory behavior." She nodded, making notes on her legal pad with the efficiency of someone who'd handled similar requests before. "Lewis, what if we find connections to other victims? What if Emma isn't the first daughter of a wealthy family that Jake has targeted for financial gain?" The possibility had been haunting me for weeks, adding another layer of violation to an already devastating situation. If he was a professional con artist who specialized in seducing wealthy daughters to gain access to family money, then Emma wasn't just married to a criminal. She was married to a predator who had systematically studied her vulnerabilities and exploited them with practiced skill. "Then we document everything and turn it over to federal authorities," I replied, my voice carrying a grimness that reflected the scope of what we might be uncovering. If Jake has done this before, there are other families out there who deserve justice, other daughters who need to know the truth about the man who manipulated them. The surveillance footage showed him completing his theft and leaving my study with the confidence of someone who believed he'd committed the perfect crime. He had no idea that every moment of his criminal activity had been recorded in detail, sufficient to secure a conviction in any court. More importantly, he had no idea that the documents he'd stolen were sophisticated forgeries designed to destroy him the moment he tried to use them. The trap was elegant in its simplicity, requiring nothing more than Jake's own greed and arrogance to function perfectly. He would walk into that boardroom believing he held the power to control a multi-million-dollar company, confident that his stolen documents gave him legal authority over decisions that affected dozens of employees and their families. He would present his evidence with the swagger of someone who believed he'd outsmarted everyone around him. And then, in front of the woman he'd manipulated and the colleagues he'd deceived, he would watch his carefully constructed lies crumble under scrutiny that he'd never anticipated. The beauty of the plan was that Jake would destroy himself. I wouldn't need to accuse him of anything. His own actions, his own words, his own arrogant confidence would provide all the evidence Emma needed to understand who she'd married. The final piece of my trap involved Emma herself, though she wouldn't know it until the confrontation reached its climax. I'd scheduled the board meeting for Friday afternoon, ensuring that Emma would be required to attend in her professional capacity as Patterson Industries' legal counsel. If Jake planned to use the stolen documents to assert control over the company, the board meeting would provide the perfect venue for his public destruction. What he didn't know was that I'd already shown the real corporate documents to every board member during individual meetings over the past week. Margaret had helped me explain that fake copies existed and warned them about potential fraud attempts without revealing Jake's identity as the likely perpetrator. Each board member understood their role in the coming confrontation, allow him to present his evidence, ask probing questions about document authenticity, and provide Emma with the professional support she would need when her personal and professional worlds collided catastrophically. The trap was comprehensive, legally sound, and psychologically devastating. Jake would walk into that boardroom believing he held ultimate power, only to discover that he'd been manipulated into exposing himself completely. The surveillance footage would simply confirm what his boardroom performance revealed. He was a criminal who'd built his entire relationship with my daughter on deception, manipulation, and calculated greed. But the most crucial element wasn't the legal evidence or the fake documents or even the surveillance footage. The most important aspect of my plan was that Emma would see Jake's true character revealed through his own actions and words. When cornered and exposed, he would show her exactly who he really was, not through my accusations or evidence, but through his own desperate attempts to justify the unjustifiable and manipulate his way out of consequences he'd earned through his own criminal choices. The boardroom at Patterson Industries had witnessed 30 years of crucial decisions, but nothing quite like what was about to unfold on this particular Friday morning. I'd arrived early, testing the conference room's projection system one final time. The surveillance footage from my home office sat queued and ready, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy Jake's carefully constructed lies. Emma entered first, her professional demeanor immaculate in a charcoal gray suit that reminded me of her mother. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd earned her law degree through merit, not connections. The irony that her own husband was about to commit corporate fraud in front of her wasn't lost on me. My daughter's legal expertise would be the instrument of his downfall. The board members filed in with their usual Friday morning energy, coffee cups in hand, discussing the weekend's plans. Margaret Chen took her usual seat to my right, her expression carefully neutral despite knowing what was coming. Board member Thomas Wright shuffled through his quarterly reports, completely unaware that the morning's agenda would be nothing like what he'd expected. Jake's entrance commanded attention. He wore his best navy suit, the one Emma had bought him for their wedding. His briefcase, leather, expensive, another gift from my family, seemed heavier than usual. The confidence in his stride suggested he believed this would be his moment of triumph, the morning he would transform from employee to owner. "Good morning, everyone," he announced, settling into his chair with theatrical authority. "Before we begin with the quarterly reports, I have some important documents that require the board's immediate attention." His voice carried a weight I'd never heard before, the tone of a man who believed he held ultimate power. Emma glanced at me with mild confusion. Board meetings followed strict protocols, and Jake had never before interrupted our established procedures. "Jake," she said professionally, "if you have materials to present, they should have been submitted 48 hours in advance for legal review." "These documents couldn't wait for normal procedures," he replied, opening his briefcase with dramatic flourish. "They concern irregularities in corporate governance that threaten the company's stability. As someone with a vested interest in Patterson Industries' future, I felt compelled to bring them directly to the board's attention." The stolen papers emerged from his briefcase like evidence in a courtroom drama. He arranged them across the conference table with the precision of a man who'd rehearsed this moment in his mind dozens of times. The fake transfer agreements, the fraudulent stock certificates, the worthless corporate resolutions, all perfectly crafted to look authentic to someone who'd never studied corporate law. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jake continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "these documents reveal that there have been unauthorized transfers of company assets, questionable accounting practices, and violations of our corporate charter. As Emma's husband and a concerned employee, I believe this board has a fiduciary duty to investigate these irregularities immediately." Thomas Wright leaned forward, squinting at the papers through his reading glasses. "Jake, these are serious allegations. Where exactly did you obtain these documents?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jake's response came without hesitation. "I discovered them during a routine audit of our filing systems. They were misfiled in a section that hadn't been updated in years. I believe someone has been deliberately hiding these irregularities from board oversight." Emma's legal training kicked in as she examined the papers more closely. Her brow furrowed as she recognized the document formats, the official seals, the signature lines. To her trained eye, they looked legitimate at first glance, exactly what I'd intended when commissioning the forgeries. But as she studied them with professional scrutiny, her expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "Wait," Emma said, her voice cutting through Jake's presentation with the authority of someone who'd spent years reviewing corporate documents. "These signatures don't match the notary seals and this stock certificate." She held up one of the papers, her hands trembling slightly. "Jake, this has never been properly registered. These documents are forgeries." The boardroom fell into stunned silence. Jake's confident demeanor crumbled as he stared at Emma in disbelief. "That's impossible. I found these in the company files. They have to be—" "No, Jake," Emma interrupted, her voice growing stronger as her legal training overcame her personal shock. "These are sophisticated fakes. The watermarks are wrong, the legal language violates basic corporate law, and the witness signatures are completely fabricated. Where did you really get these?" "Jake," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the mounting tension, "I have one simple question for you." The room fell silent, as every board member turned their attention to me. "Could you please explain to this board exactly how you obtained access to documents that were secured in my personal safe?" The color drained from Jake's face so quickly I thought he might faint. His mouth opened and closed several times before any words emerged. These weren't in your safe, Lewis. I told you, I found them in our filing system." "That's interesting," I replied, reaching for my phone, "because I have high-definition video footage showing you breaking into my home office last Tuesday night at 2:15 a.m., opening my personal safe using a combination you'd memorized, and photographing those exact documents." Emma's gasp echoed through the boardroom. Her husband's carefully constructed facade crumbled as she stared at him with growing horror. "Jake," she whispered, "you broke into my father's house?" The projection screen flickered to life, showing crystal-clear footage of Jake crouched beside my safe, his phone's flashlight illuminating his concentrated expression. The timestamp in the corner read, Tuesday, 2:17 a.m. Every board member watched in stunned silence as his theft played out in real time, his methodical photography of each document captured in perfect detail. "I can explain," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. The evidence was undeniable. The crime recorded from multiple angles. "Lewis, you don't understand the pressure I've been under. The gambling debts, the loan sharks threatening Emma. I was trying to protect our family." "By stealing from your family?" Emma's voice carried a pain that cut through me like a blade. Her professional composure was cracking, revealing the wounded wife beneath. "Jake, how could you do this? How could you violate my father's trust? How could you violate mine?" Jake's desperation filled the boardroom like smoke, transforming the professional atmosphere into something thick and suffocating. His confident facade had evaporated the moment my surveillance footage began playing on the conference screen, replaced by the frantic energy of a cornered animal who'd suddenly realized the trap he'd walked into. But instead of accepting responsibility for his crimes, he chose to attack, and his target was the man who'd given him everything: a job, a family, a chance at legitimate success he'd thrown away for gambling debts and easy money. "You want to know the truth?" His voice cracked with mounting hysteria, his professional demeanor crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. "Yes, I took those documents. But this whole situation is your fault, Lewis. You've been manipulating Emma for years, controlling her life, keeping her dependent on your money like some kind of psychological prison warden. I was trying to free her from your toxic influence." Emma recoiled as if she'd been slapped, her legal training warring with the emotional devastation of watching her husband transform into someone she didn't recognize. "Jake, what are you talking about? My father has never manipulated me. He's supported every decision I've ever made, including my decision to marry you. Haven't you ever wondered why none of your serious relationships lasted before me?" He pressed on, his voice gaining strength from Emma's visible confusion and hurt. His desperation had transformed into something more dangerous, a manipulative fury that sought to burn down everyone around him rather than accept responsibility for his own criminal actions. "He sabotaged them all, Emma, made sure you stayed single, stayed working for the family business, stayed under his psychological control like a puppet dancing to his tune. The lie was so audacious, so perfectly crafted to exploit Emma's deepest insecurities about her relationship with me, that I felt genuine admiration for his manipulative skills even as I watched him use them to destroy the woman he'd claimed to love. He understood exactly which emotional buttons to press, how to turn a victim into a villain with surgical precision that spoke to months of studying Emma's psychological vulnerabilities. "That's ridiculous," I said quietly, but I could see doubt creeping into Emma's expression like poison seeping into clear water. His accusation had found its mark with devastating accuracy, exploiting fears that every adult child harbors about their independence and autonomy. "Is it ridiculous?" He stood up, pointing at me with theatrical fury that would have been impressive if it weren't so obviously calculated to manipulate the room's emotions. "When was the last time Emma made a major life decision without consulting you first, Lewis? Her career path, her apartment choice, even her wardrobe selections? Everything runs through Lewis Patterson's approval system like some kind of corporate hierarchy applied to family life." Thomas Wright cleared his throat uncomfortably, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade. The poor man had come to discuss quarterly projections and found himself witnessing a family psychodrama that was rapidly spinning out of control. "Perhaps we should return to the matter at hand. Jake, regardless of your personal grievances with Lewis, you committed multiple felonies by breaking into his home and stealing corporate documents." "I committed survival," Jake shot back, his voice reaching a pitch that made several board members flinch. "Do you know what it's like living in this family? Every conversation is monitored for signs of disloyalty, every expense questioned like you're a child asking for allowance money, every decision subjected to the almighty Lewis's judgment and approval." Emma's professional training warred with her emotional turmoil, creating a conflict that played across her face like a silent movie. As Patterson Industries' legal counsel, she understood that Jake had confessed to multiple crimes in front of witnesses. But as his wife, she was hearing accusations that reframed her entire family history through a lens of manipulation and psychological abuse. Margaret Chen had remained silent throughout Jake's tirade, but now she opened a folder that had been sitting beside her laptop with the deliberate precision of someone who'd been waiting for exactly the right moment to speak. "Jake," she said in the crisp, professional tone that had made her one of California's most respected corporate attorneys, "I think the board should hear about your complete financial situation before we continue this discussion about who's manipulating whom." "My finances are none of this board's business," Jake snapped, but his voice carried less conviction than before. Margaret's interruption had broken his rhetorical momentum, forcing him to shift from offense to defense at exactly the wrong moment. "They become our business when they involve systematic embezzlement from Patterson Industries," Margaret replied, her voice carrying the weight of evidence that Jake couldn't argue away. "Over the past 8 months, you've systematically stolen $23,847 from company accounts through altered expense reports, fake invoices, and unauthorized credit card transactions." Emma's face went white as she processed the magnitude of Jake's betrayal. This wasn't just about stolen documents or family dynamics. This was about systematic financial fraud that had been happening under her nose while she worked alongside him every day. "Jake, is this true? Have you been stealing from the company while I was doing legal work to protect it?" "I was borrowing against my future earnings," he said desperately, his voice taking on the wheedling tone of someone who knew his lies were falling apart but couldn't stop trying to manipulate the situation. "I always intended to pay it back once my financial situation improved. Your debts to loan sharks," I added quietly, my voice cutting through his excuses like a knife. "The same people who threatened to hurt Emma if you didn't pay them back. You weren't protecting our daughter, Jake. You were using her as collateral for your gambling addiction." The boardroom fell silent except for Emma's ragged breathing as the full scope of Jake's betrayal became clear. But he wasn't finished destroying her yet. His desperation had reached the point where he was willing to say anything, destroy anyone, to avoid taking responsibility for his actions. What came next would be his cruelest revelation yet, and it would shatter Emma's understanding of love, trust, and human nature itself. "Fine," Jake said, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper that carried more menace than his previous shouting. "You want the whole truth about this family's dysfunction? I'll give you the whole truth." He turned to face Emma directly, his expression hardening into something cruel and calculating that transformed his familiar features into those of a stranger. "I never loved you, Emma. Not really. Not the way you deserved to be loved." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of Emma's wedding ring hitting the conference table as she pulled it from her finger with shaking hands. But Jake wasn't finished with his destruction. "I researched your family for 3 months before I ever introduced myself," he continued, his voice gaining strength from the devastation he was causing. "I knew your routines, your favorite places, your emotional vulnerabilities, your family's financial situation down to the last dollar. Every conversation we had, every date we went on, every moment of intimacy we shared, it was all calculated to get me access to your father's money and business connections." Emma stared at her wedding ring where it had rolled to a stop beside Jake's stolen documents, the small circle of white gold suddenly seeming insignificant compared to the magnitude of deception it had represented. 3 months of research," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper as the full implication sank in. "You studied me like a mark in some kind of con game." Jake's facade finally cracked completely, revealing the cold contempt that had been hiding beneath months of romantic performance. "You were so easy, Emma. Lonely attorney desperate for validation, successful enough to be attractive but insecure enough to be manipulated. I gave you exactly what you thought you wanted. A man who seemed to understand your professional ambitions, who supported your independence while providing the emotional security you craved." Each revelation struck Emma like a physical blow, systematically dismantling every precious memory she had of their relationship's beginning. The board members watched in horrified fascination as Jake destroyed his own marriage with the thoroughness of someone who had nothing left to lose and wanted to inflict as much collateral damage as possible. "The coffee shop where we accidentally met?" His voice took on the tone of someone confessing to a crime with perverse pride in his technique. "I'd been watching you there for 2 weeks, timing your arrival, studying your ordering habits, learning your patterns like a predator studies prey. The book you were reading that I just happened to have read too? I bought it the day before and skimmed online summaries so I could engage you in conversation. Your favorite restaurant where I surprised you on our 3rd date?" His recitation of deception continued with mechanical precision. "I'd already asked 3 of your coworkers where you liked to eat, what kind of atmosphere appealed to you, what would make you feel special and chosen. Every romantic gesture was calculated, every surprise was researched. Every moment of apparent spontaneity was carefully planned to manipulate your emotions." Margaret Chen closed her laptop with a sharp click that echoed through the silent boardroom. "Jake Morrison," she said in her most formal legal tone, "you are confessing to fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, conspiracy to commit corporate theft, and systematic psychological manipulation in front of 6 witnesses. I strongly advise you to stop talking immediately and retain legal counsel." "Legal counsel?" Jake's laugh turned hysterical, the sound of someone whose grip on reality was slipping with each passing moment. "With what money, counselor? I've lost everything I stole and more at the casinos. My credit cards are maxed out, paying minimum balances. My bank accounts are empty except for overdraft fees, and Tommy's people are probably looking for me right now to collect on debts that have been accumulating interest at rates that would make loan sharks blush." Emma finally spoke, her voice carrying a strength that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. The devastation was complete, but it had also burned away illusions and left behind something harder and more resilient. "You won something, Jake. You won the complete destruction of any chance you had for redemption or forgiveness. If you'd come to me honestly about your gambling problem, about your debts, about your desperation, I would have helped you find treatment." "Help me?" Jake spat, his mask of calculated charm finally discarded completely. "You mean control me, just like your father controls you and everyone else in this company. This whole family operates on conditional love. You're only valuable as long as you're useful, only loved as long as you're compliant with Lewis Patterson's vision of proper behavior." "No," I said, standing for the first time since the meeting began, my voice carrying 3 decades of business authority and paternal protection. "Jake, You're confusing love with transaction because that's the only way you know how to relate to other people. Emma loved you unconditionally for 18 months. She defended you when I expressed concerns, supported your career development when others questioned your qualifications, built her dreams around a future with you that existed only in her imagination. The police arrived 37 minutes later, summoned by Thomas Wright during Jake's final confession when it became clear that we were witnessing not just corporate theft, but the complete breakdown of someone whose criminal behavior had escalated beyond any possibility of internal resolution. They found Jake still sitting in the boardroom chair, staring at his hands as if he couldn't quite believe what they'd done or what his mouth had confessed in front of witnesses. Officer Maria Santos read him his Miranda rights in a voice that had delivered the same warning thousands of times to defendants who'd talked themselves into convictions. The words echoed strangely in the professional space where I'd built my company's success over 3 decades, a reminder that criminal behavior could penetrate even the most carefully constructed legitimate enterprises. Emma signed the complaint against Jake with steady hands, her legal training overriding her emotional devastation as she formally accused her husband of multiple felonies. The charges were extensive and supported by overwhelming evidence: embezzlement, burglary, fraud, conspiracy, theft of corporate assets, and systematic financial manipulation. The surveillance footage made conviction inevitable, but Jake's own confession had sealed his fate more completely than any physical evidence could have accomplished. 6 months later, Emma returned to work with a transformation that amazed everyone who knew her. The betrayal had scarred her deeply, but it had also revealed reserves of resilience and strength that even I hadn't fully recognized in my daughter. She'd spent the intervening months in intensive counseling, working through the psychological manipulation and learning to trust her instincts again while developing new frameworks for evaluating people's motivations and character. Her first day back, Emma implemented a comprehensive series of new financial controls, background check procedures, and accountability measures that would prevent future Jake Morrisons from infiltrating our family business. The experience had taught her that love without wisdom is vulnerability, but it had also shown her that betrayal, while devastating, doesn't have to be permanently destructive if it leads to greater self-awareness and stronger boundaries. "Dad," she said during our first private conversation after her return, "I need you to know that I don't blame you for what happened with Jake. Your investigation and the trap you set, it was the only way I would have believed the truth. If you'd simply told me about your suspicions, I would have defended him and probably accused you of the exact manipulation he claimed you were guilty of." Jake Morrison received a sentence of 4 years and 8 months in state prison, followed by 5 years of probation and full restitution of stolen funds plus penalties that would take him decades to repay. The judge noted during sentencing that his voluntary confession had been given freely, without coercion, making his conviction inevitable while demonstrating a level of narcissistic cruelty that warranted the maximum sentence allowed under California law. The deeper background investigation revealed connections to at least 2 other families in different states where he had attempted similar romantic cons targeting wealthy daughters. The federal authorities were building cases that would likely result in additional charges and prison time, ensuring that his criminal career was definitively ended. Other victims were coming forward as news of his conviction spread, creating a pattern of predatory behavior that stretched back nearly a decade. The deeper investigation Margaret conducted revealed the true scope of Jake's predatory behavior. He wasn't just a gambling addict who'd stumbled into crime. He was a sophisticated con artist who had perfected his methods over nearly a decade. Sarah Mitchell's expanded background check uncovered a disturbing pattern. Jake had targeted at least 4 other wealthy daughters across 3 states, each time using variations of the same calculated approach. In Denver, he'd courted the daughter of a construction magnate for 6 months before attempting to forge loan documents using her father's company as collateral. The scheme failed when their family attorney spotted inconsistencies, but Jake had disappeared before charges could be filed. In Phoenix, he'd nearly succeeded in manipulating a real estate heiress into signing over power of attorney for her trust fund, only to be exposed when a suspicious bank manager demanded additional verification. Most chilling was the case in Portland, where Jake had actually married a tech executive's daughter and systematically drained her personal accounts over 18 months before vanishing with nearly $300,000. The victim, Sarah Miller, had never reported the theft due to shame and family pressure to avoid scandal. When federal investigators contacted her about Jake's pattern of crimes, she broke down in tears, finally able to tell someone about the psychological manipulation she'd endured. "He made me believe I was crazy," Sarah told the FBI during her recorded interview, which Margaret played for Emma as part of her healing process. "Every time I questioned his spending or his stories, he would turn it back on me. Said I was paranoid, controlling, that I didn't trust him because I had daddy issues. He was so convincing that I started believing maybe I was the problem." Emma listened to Sarah's testimony with the recognition of someone who'd experienced identical manipulation tactics. The validation that she wasn't Jake's only victim helped accelerate her recovery, transforming her shame into righteous anger and her self-doubt into renewed confidence in her instincts. The federal charges brought against Jake included wire fraud, interstate commerce violations, and organized financial crimes that carried a potential sentence of 15 additional years. The prosecution's case was airtight, built on a foundation of documented victims, recorded confessions, and a clear pattern of predatory behavior spanning multiple jurisdictions. During the sentencing hearing, Emma chose to deliver a victim impact statement that left the entire courtroom in stunned silence. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady and strong, "Jake Morrison didn't just steal money from my family. He stole my ability to trust my own judgment, my faith in love itself, my confidence in my professional skills. For months after his arrest, I questioned every relationship, every friendship, every business decision, wondering if I was being manipulated again." She paused, making eye contact with Jake for the first time since his confession in the boardroom. "But in destroying me, he accidentally gave me something valuable, the knowledge that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. I survived his worst, and I'm still here, still successful, still capable of love, just more wisely applied." The judge sentenced Jake to the maximum allowable terms on all charges to be served consecutively rather than concurrently. 23 years and 4 months in federal prison, followed by 10 years of supervised probation with restrictions on his access to financial institutions and dating platforms. He would be nearly 60 years old before he could live unsupervised again. Emma never remarried, but she found fulfillment in her work, her friendships, and our restored father-daughter relationship that had been strengthened rather than weakened by the crisis. The experience had taught her to value authenticity over romance, substance over surface charm, and genuine compatibility over performative affection designed to manipulate her emotions. 3 years after Jake's conviction, Emma established the Patterson Foundation for Financial Crime Victims, providing legal assistance and psychological counseling for people who'd been targeted by romantic con artists. She testified before Congress about the need for stronger interstate coordination in prosecuting relationship-based financial fraud, helping to pass legislation that closed loopholes Jake and others had exploited. The man who had thought he was robbing an old man's safe had instead robbed himself of everything: his freedom, his marriage, his reputation, and any possibility of redemption through honest acknowledgement of his crimes. But Emma proved stronger than his manipulations. She rebuilt her capacity for trust gradually, carefully, with the wisdom that comes from surviving betrayal. As for me, I learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone you love is the truth, no matter how much it hurts. In trying to destroy my family, Jake had only strengthened our bond and revealed his own moral bankruptcy. The red light on my security camera still blinks in my study, a small reminder that vigilance is the price of peace. Some lessons are worth the cost of learning them, and some people reveal their true character only when they believe no one is watching. Justice, I discovered, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's simply about the truth. If you found this story compelling, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales of family drama and justice served. Share your thoughts about Lewis's approach in the comments. Was he right to expose Jake so publicly, or should he have handled the situation differently? Your perspectives help shape the conversations around these complex family dynamics. Thank you for watching, and remember, trust is earned, but verification protects everyone.